I was just finishing up hours of testing on the ASUS 4K 240Hz 32-inch Quantum.OLED monitor when, surprise, ASUS drops a firmware update, which, based on the notes, seemed like a big one. A really big one, and it was. So out the window, all that testing had to go because their HDR performance with this new update has changed quite a bit. Now, if you've been watching my reviews, you'll likely know that while these 32-inch OLEDs are, in my opinion, the best monitor tech we have today, they do also have a few downsides, the biggest one being unimpressive HDR brightness, where they get their cheeks absolutely clapped by their TV counterparts, and unfortunately, you have to choose on many of these monitors between a mode which allows the monitor to hit up to 1000 nits but drastically reduces the average brightness, or an HDR400 True Black mode which tracks correctly and is much brighter overall but limits the monitor to a maximum of roughly 480 nits. Well, on this new firmware from ASUS, that's no longer the case, and we're about to take a look at what exactly has changed, but I do want to let you guys know up front, this is not a sponsored video from ASUS in any way, shape, or form. Although I do have a sponsor that sells cables I typically run at the end of almost all my videos, but in terms of ASUS, no. They simply lent me the monitor, and at this point, I'm surprised they'll even do that because I have thrown hands with some of their previous products, so I stand to gain nothing by, tricking you into buying it or anything like that. If that are the case, let's take a look. And as you can see here in a 1% window with this new update, the Cinema HDR, the Gaming HDR, and the Console HDR plus Boost setting all are around 1000 nits in a 1% window, whereas the HDR400 True Black and the Dolby Vision Bright setting, which by the way, this firmware update also does bring Dolby Vision, could be a great option for some console players or if you're hooking up a DVD player to watch movies, but for PC gaming, Dolby Vision is far and few between and can have some serious issues as well, so I'd probably recommend leaving it off if you're using this monitor for PC gaming, but that's besides the point. Today we're focusing in on the HDR10 settings, which should be the settings I would recommend for PCs. Anyway, on those three HDR10 settings, yeah, they're around 1000 nits. They are significantly brighter than the HDR400 True Black in that 1% window, but we already knew these monitors could do 1000 nits. But what's different about these settings from ASUS is that they're doing it without really sacrificing much at all when it comes to the average picture level brightness of these monitors. As you can see, the Console HDR plus Boost setting is just behind the HDR400 True Black when opening something up like a Google Doc, and then the Gaming HDR is just a tiny bit behind that. We're talking 10 to 15% difference in brightness, not a massive amount, not the 30 to I think like 50% I saw in some cases on different monitors on previous firmware. Don't know if that's going to be the case today on all monitors, but I do recall seeing quite substantial differences on a number of monitors. Here, not necessarily the case. Now, taking a look at a 10% window, all these settings are basically identical. I did throw in here, guys, by the way, an ideal OLED that should be achievable in 2024 as a reference for what I want to see here, because even on this new setting, even though it can hit 1000 nits, as you can see in a 10% window, it's still going to be that roughly, 470 to 480 nits that we see on basically every single Quantum.OLED, which simply, even though this is a lot brighter, it's still not enough to really give you impactful HDR scenes. We do need a 10% window which reaches around 1000 nits to really wow us with some HDR highlights, but regardless, this is still a big improvement, and I'm going to show you guys why. Now, in a 100% window, as you can see, yes, the Gaming HDR and especially the Cinema HDR modes are going to give you a slight decrease in the overall brightness, and I would like to, again, with an ideal OLED, see 300 nits in a 100% window, but they're not too far behind the HDR400 True Black. They're pretty close, especially the Console HDR plus Boost, and in an actual game here, you can see in a high APL scene, well, they're all going to give you pretty similar results. But again, we have to remember that these new settings from ASUS do allow it, unlike anything I've seen in the past, to use these similar brightness settings for the most part, but then extend up into 1000 nits when it has the capability to do so. So if you play a game that has a lot of nighttime scenes, this ASUS monitor will seem way brighter than one that you're having to use in the HDR400 True Black mode, which is basically all I've been recommending for every single other QD OLED monitor I've been testing as their peak 1000 modes, just simply had way too aggressive of dimming and was not very usable in my opinion. Not the case here on the ASUS. You're kind of getting the best of both worlds, allowing it to shine in those darker scenes. So really impressive to see that happening. And as you can see in the average across the 5 different tests that I ran, well, the Cinema HDR setting is around 23% brighter than the 400 True Black mode, the Gaming HDR around 28% brighter, and the Console HDR plus Boost around 32% brighter. I mean, close to 30% brighter than not only the True Black mode on this monitor, but likely somewhere around there when compared to other monitors when taking in a mix of various different types of HDR things you might be looking at. Is a very, very impressive improvement and something that puts ASUS, in my opinion, significantly ahead of their competition when it comes to the HDR capabilities of their monitor. Now, I will warn you guys, the Cinema HDR unfortunately does not quite track EOTF correctly. It is going to actually under brighten some highlights, which I really don't recommend using that setting. And then the Console HDR plus Boost will over brighten everything, so I probably wouldn't use that setting either. But the Gaming HDR mode does seem to be a good mix. It does almost perfectly follow EOTF all the way up to around 800 nits, and then over 800 nits when you start approaching 1000 nits. It can do some wonky stuff, so they do have to improve it a little bit, but overall it is actually pretty good, especially in the areas where it matters, in the lowlights, the midlights, and then of course the somewhat highlights as well. All that stuff matters quite a bit for retrieving detail, and that's where it gets it right. That's great to see. And in fact, even the color checker analysis I ran on CalMan showed up with some results on this new mode that were overall pretty good. In fact, if I was able to simply temperature balance HDR like I can in sRGB on this monitor, well, it probably would be overall very good. So hopefully ASUS can bring that forward in the future at some point to allow us to get a perfect 6500K, not too red, not too green, not too blue. You get the idea. But overall, that's actually a lot better than a lot of other monitors that I've seen as well. So really good results even on color in HDR, which is pretty surprising. So overall, this firmware update has made HDR far better on this monitor, and in my opinion, significantly better than any other OLED I've tested so far, as again, you don't have to swap between the different modes anymore. But of course, your mileage may vary depending on the content you're displaying on screen. That said, while I haven't completely finished my review yet, if you've been waiting to hear what is the best 32-inch OLED for gaming in 2024, I'm leaning heavily towards saying this is likely going to be the one. And if you're on the fence, you might want to consider using my affiliate link in the description below to buy one now before people start buying them up again once they learn about this new firmware. And remember, this is not a sponsored video from ASUS. They simply lent me the monitor for review, and trust me, I have really torn apart some of their products in the past. This one is actually just good. But of course, it's not perfect, and I do have some feedback for ASUS. If anyone over ASUS is watching, or even if they're not, maybe you could share this video around so it gets in front of them. Here's things that I want to see. It's great that we have RGB color temperature control in sRGB. That's something that we don't have on a lot of other monitors, so that's great. But I do want to see that come to HDR, because much like every single other QD-OLED I've measured, it's simply too red. White is too red, and I'd love to be able to correct that on my end. And in fact, leaning more into that, I'd actually like to see them expand the 1-point RGB white point control to at least 2-point RGB color temperature control for sRGB and HDR, although honestly 21-point would be preferred, much like a TV. I also want to see them slightly fix up that EOTF in the gaming mode while retaining this brightness or boosting it maybe even higher. And I do want to see them roll out a firmware update which allows users to boost the 10% window brightness to 1000 nits via an opt-in firmware update, which will void the 3-year burn-in warranty of the panel when installed. Again, remember, this would be opt-in, so you do not have to do this if you want to keep your 3-year burn-in warranty support, which I do understand if that's the case. My idea is to lock users into a branch of updates once they've agreed to go for that higher brightness, which only allows them to install future updates, which also still let ASUS know that you have voided that burn-in warranty if you're on that branch of firmware updates. I think this would alleviate the risk on their side from having people trying to RMA units that they are basically burning in prematurely through far higher brightness, but it would also be good for the consumer, as this would give people like me an option to get far better HDR out of the monitor, even if it comes with a higher risk of burn-in. So Hopefully that helps out with future firmware updates. If this video helped you, be sure to share it around, put in the comments below what monitor you're using, and be sure to like the video as well. But that's going to do it for this one. Be sure to get subscribed for the upcoming full review on this monitor, as I will be going over a lot more detail in that review to help you determine if this truly is the best monitor that you can buy today, or if there's something else that's better, or if you should just wait altogether. Whether you're looking to connect a new console, gaming PC, or just need a fast and reliable HDMI cable to connect over long distances, Rupro has you covered with their certified 8K HDMI 2.1 fiber optic cable, available in sizes of up to 50 feet and can deliver a perfect full 48 gigabits per second connection over distances other cables could only dream of reaching. And with 48 gigabits per second of bandwidth, it can easily drive 8K 60 FPS or 4K 144 FPS 10-bit HDR video through its ultra-thin, flexible, and durable housing, and it even supports ER. So if you're in the market for a cable that can drive a beautiful new TV or monitor, be sure to check out Rupro on Amazon today.